It's been a while since I've played a game that I haven't already played. I love going back to my past gaming experiences, going through moments of nostalgia, and seeing how these games hold up today. However, by doing this, my backlog of games I need to play has only grown more and more. Day one purchases still staring at me, gathering dust. Blasphemous was one of these games. Blasphemous interested me immediately through its themes and setting based around religion, which I adore. If your game deals with religion or the occult, you've probably already gotten my attention. Now, I've stated this before, and I might have to redact this statement by the end of this video, but Metroidvanias are not a go-to genre for me personally. With this being said, in recent times, I've slowly gravitated to the genre through the indie market because of the wealth of incredible art present. Games like Guacamelee, Hollow Knight, and Ori are such beautiful games to experience as their visuals are so unique and honestly stunning, and I've grown to appreciate the Metroidvania genre more and more through these games. Blasphemous looked to be another Metroidvania that would captivate me, but also looked like it could make me finally think of the genre as a go-to. So now that I've finally played through Blasphemous, what did I think? Blasphemous might be my personal favourite Metroidvania so far. Before I dive into why that is though, I do want to drop a quick spoiler warning. If you are someone who hasn't played through Blasphemous and doesn't want to be spoiled, all I can say is go and play it, because it is worth it. If you don't care about spoilers though, or have already played Blasphemous yourself, well, you're in the right place. I do also want to mention, Blasphemous does contain quite a few Spanish words and names that I'll try my best to pronounce correctly, but the Australian accent may get in the way. Welcome to So I Finally Played Blasphemous. Before we talk about the story and gameplay for Blasphemous, I think it's important to go over some brief history as it helps clarify the game's setting, and I'll be honest, it's something I find interesting. Blasphemous is developed by the Game Kitchen, who are based in the south of Spain in the city of Seville, an area described by the developers as a very religious place, with many traditions still upheld today. Holy Week is one such event, deeply rooted into the culture of southern Spain. Holy Week is an annual tribute of the Passion of Jesus Christ, where people perform penance processions in the streets the week before Easter. I don't think I have to explain why this is relevant to Blasphemous, but I will anyway. The penitential mask or metallic hood of the penitent one is inspired by the robes of the penitents during Holy Week. These robes historically date back to the Middle Ages, where the capirote was used by penitents to publicly expose repentance for their sins. The penitent hood was later adopted by the Spanish Inquisition, forcing people accused of heresy to wear as a symbol of shame through different colors and symbols embodied on the hood's fabric. This is important because the design of the penitent one was the beginning of the game's whole setting, as it provided a clear idea for Blasphemous and let further ideas flow more naturally from here onwards. The first domino falling made the team realize that there are so many stories and folklore for the Vikings, Japanese and English, but not for Spain. So with the design of the penitent one realized, it became the key that led to basing the game on the culture and folklore of southern Spain. There is more to the studio's history though, as Seville was one of the headquarters for the Spanish Inquisition, an order that was established in the 1400s and didn't disband until the 1800s. The Spanish Inquisition was intended to rid any threats to the Catholic faith within Spain by identifying heretics and those practicing witchcraft, a very common claim during the early days of the Inquisition. Heresy is a broad term in regards to the Spanish Inquisition, but it essentially boiled down to those the church had converted returning to their previous faith was an act of heresy. Those caught of heresy could be tortured and burned at the stake, or sent to a foreign land. The history of the Spanish Inquisition is still hotly debated amongst historians as to the severity of the institution, as it spans such a great length of time and was reformed for different regions of Spain frequently. However, it is widely accepted as a time of great corruption with incredible amounts of religious intolerance. The Spanish Inquisition isn't an event referenced by the developers in any interviews or the game's art book, but in regards to Blasphemous, the game's themes of corruption within the church and turning into monsters to hunt down those without faith or the correct faith, not to mention the studio's location and its connection to this historical event. Just seems like potential inspiration, that's all. And there is an Inquisition in-game, an achievement titled Inquisition that pertains to executing, and some character dialogue that could be references to this event. So there is that. There is more history and culture I'd like to dive into, but I'll talk more specifics when relevant. For now, this has been a brief history lesson from a dummy on the internet. Blasphemous is set in the deeply religious realm of Custodia, in which a curse has fallen upon the land in the form of this sorrowful miracle. The miracle manifests itself to both the devoted and the sinful in the form of blessings and grace, but more often than not, as we'll see, punishment and corruption. Due to this curse upon the land, the realm has become populated by monstrous inhuman beings, thought to have been created from humans, punished by the miracle's powers. This is where the player comes in. We assume the role of the penitent one, a warrior forever vowed to silence as penance. We awaken to find ourselves surrounded by hundreds of our brethren, and proceed to leave this graveyard. It's outside where we get our objective for the game by a man named Deo Gracias, the witness and narrator of the acts of the miracle as his penance. Deo Gracias informs us of our goal, the Cradle of Affliction, a relic of the first miracle that sits atop a pile of ash in the Mother of Mothers Church. To get inside the locked off church, however, we must acquire 3 humiliations, each in different regions of Custodia, and it's from this point where we begin our pilgrimage to rid the land of its guilt. This introduction to Blasphemous hooked me in right from the get-go because it sets up so many questions that I wanted to learn the answers to. You begin the game rising from piles of dead bodies that immediately sets up the idea that you're not special, but also raises the question of, well, how did I get here and why have I been chosen to essentially save the world? The question of how you got there is answered through the game's comic, showing our first attempt at penance failing. And the comic is well worth a look just through the artwork alone, but I do wish this was something we could learn in-game. The pilgrimage or the journey to the cradle is the narrative's objective, and the narrative can be broken down to the penitent one's guilt is his strength. The pilgrimage acts as his penance, however, it is through the will of the miracle to decide if his guilt is enough to earn the penitent one's salvation. This narrative leads to 2 possible endings in Ending A and B. Ending B is one I'm sure most first-time players will experience. You reach the turned throne and face a mountain of ash. You become sluggish whilst traversing this mountain until it consumes you, and inevitably kills the penitent one. Your penance now over, but Custodia is still no better off, as you see all who have tried and failed before you looking very similar to the game's beginning. This ending is a downer, and if you're like me, well, this just isn't good enough. So you say screw that and start again. To be deemed worthy of communicating with the miracle, the penitent one must find the immaculate bead, and through death, this bead will gradually absorb your guilt until it reaches true guilt form. This is required to destroy the statues of confessors scattered around Custodia. We need to destroy these statues to free them of their guilt as well, and through finding and destroying all of these statues, you'll be able to unlock the game's true ending. This time the Mountain of Ash is different and seamless to climb to the top as we reach the turned throne. We sit atop the throne and our last act of penance is to kill ourselves with our sword. This sacrifice has freed the land of Custodia of its guilt as it remains within the penitent one. The citizens praise his lifeless body as he is now the true last son of the miracle, and savior of the land. We do see after the credits a character known as Chrysanta taking the sword from the penitent one's body, leaving us to believe the realm's guilt and punishment is about to be re-released. Again, this is all just the narrative's objective, because the story for Blasphemous is as complex or simple as you want it to be. Throughout the penitent one's pilgrimage, you'll only have more and more questions, but it is up to you if you want the answers. Personally, I couldn't get enough of this game's story as I scoured through item descriptions, completed side quests, and really listened to what the characters were saying, and began to piece the puzzle of Blasphemous' story together for myself. This isn't going to be a story explained or lore analysis for Blasphemous, as there is honestly a lot to dive into, and I have plenty more I need to talk about. However, I do think a perfect example of Blasphemous storytelling is shown through Esdras and Perpetua of the Anointed Legion. The Anointed Legion is a group responsible for protecting the Mother of Mothers Church, and Esdras is someone we see following the Penitent One along his journey to acquire the 3 humiliations. We learn through Esdras talking to his sister Perpetua that he intends to stop the Penitent One before he can reach the church, which at first doesn't raise too much suspicion. It isn't until we progress further that we face a harpy-like creature who drops an item called Perpetua's Protection. Through the item description, we learn that this item is used to link this harpy and Esdras, but we also learn that the sister Esdras was talking to is dead, a fact that he could not come to grips with or accept. All the puzzle pieces fall into place as we finally face Esdras in battle, and as we begin to wear him down, the harpy-like creature we had fought earlier returns, revealed to be Perpetua. This example of storytelling is what Blasphemous does incredibly well. Very rarely will you have all the answers given to you at once, but you'll always be acquiring more and more slivers of information as you progress through Custodia. It is up to you to put the slices of information together yourself to complete the game's many story arcs, and it is incredibly satisfying to do so. Esdras and Perpetua is what I would consider to be a main story arc, as all the information is can't miss. But if you don't bother to look into the game's item descriptions and lore, then these storylines won't carry the same weight as they could, or maybe you just won't experience them, period. This was just an example, a little taste of the storytelling, because there are many, many more. The bosses, the villains, the miracle, the penitent one, and really anyone you can interact with has a story that can be unraveled, and I loved every second of it. I think the best way I can describe my feelings towards Blasphemous' story is I didn't play through the game twice just to see both endings. I played through the game twice because after my first playthrough came to an end, I still wasn't done being in this world. I still had questions that I needed answers to. I wanted to learn as much as I possibly could, and when my second playthrough came to a close, not only did I have a much more complete ending, but I truly felt that I had learnt as much as I possibly could, and I loved it. I don't think I'm saying anything groundbreaking or revolutionary when I say that Blasphemous is absolutely gorgeous. I mentioned in the introduction that the game initially interested me through its art style, but playing it for myself, I only grew a further appreciation of the game's art. Blasphemous feels like you're experiencing a historic painted world, which makes sense because of the game's kitchen's inspirations in this department. Spain's history in the art world is almost legendary, and there are many artists and their work that I can see represented within the game. Christ on the Cross by Murillo and Penitent Saint Jerome by Ribera are maybe some obscure references, but to me they both speak to Blasphemous' tone. Murillo's Christ on the Cross is a truly dark and somber rendition of a now pretty stock standard religious work. What makes this painting interesting is the dark tone. What we usually see in this type of work is some form of light to highlight a sense of hope, or in this case, faith. but in Murillo's there's none. The light comes from Christ himself, but more to show the grim nature of this iconic pose rather than instill any sense of faith, a theme that carries through into blasphemous religious tones. The same can be said for Ribera's Penitent Saint Jerome, which is again a darker look at religion, this time though showing prayer and the search for answers with a rock in what I'm assuming is used much like the beginning of the game. Both of these artworks still show your typical religious commentary, which makes sense given their creation. The most important artist I see represented as inspiration within Blasphemous though was liberal artist Francisco de Goya. Works like A Procession of Flagellants, The Witch's Sabbath, Satan Devouring His Son, and A Heroic Feat with Dead Men are all works used to commentate on Goya's look at religion, the Inquisition, Napoleon's invasion, and folklore. Again, obviously, a procession of flagellants is a theme we see extensively in Blasphemous, with the search of penance and further inspiring the penitent one's design. But the look at religion through the Witch's Sabbath, showing Satan worshippers acting as any other religion, or a heroic feat with dead men, highlighting the brutality humans can inflict upon one another, are all represented within Blasphemous design. Satan Devouring His Son is a piece that inspired the design for Gemina, but the way Blasphemous is presented and how the game's many backdrops are painted remind me of the same sort of brushstroke work. I could list many others, like the Lady of the Six Sorrows and Tre Angustias designs inspired through the Witch's Flight, but I think you get my point at this stage. The game aesthetically uses so much great Spanish art as inspirations and creates great art in its own right. There is so much to talk about as to why I loved Blasphemous visuals as much as I did, whether it be the Penitent One's design incorporating the capirote, the crown of thorns, and an ancient Roman imperial mask, giving the design a feeling of guilt in its presentation alone. The symbol of the Twisted One and taking a unique spin of Jesus on the cross, and somehow making it even bleaker. The many bosses we encounter that are immediately striking, and some based on stories from Spanish folklore, like Our Lady of the Charred Visage, Melquiades the Exhumed Archbishop, or Expositor, Scion of Abjuration. The game's environments further telling Blasphemous' story as we see how important faith is to the people of Custodia, with the absurd amount of churches scattered across the land. But we also see through characters and the atmosphere of the game's areas that this faith is not going well for them. The game's aesthetics and visual decisions are so impressive and such a big reason why the story was so compelling for me, and why I wanted to learn more about this world. The visuals present so much intrigue that again, after my first playthrough, I bought the game's art book just to learn more about what made this game tick, and it was worth every cent. Blasphemous truly feels like you're traversing a moment people will look back on in terms of the conversation for video game art. It's spectacular. I suppose I best actually talk about the game aspect of Blasphemous, since we're talking about a video game. Blasphemous gameplay is a much simpler aspect of the game to talk about because it's a 2D Metroidvania. You sort of know what you're getting into, but it does also lean into the Souls-like genre as well, but not quite to the extent of Salt and Sanctuary, which feels like a straight-up 2D Souls game. Blasphemous does feel like it incorporates the Souls-like aspect to make Metroidvania tropes feel less tedious. Yes, there is quite a lot of backtracking in Blasphemous. However, as long as you're exploring each area, you'll find shortcuts that make this process so much less of a ball ache, along with portals that allow you to travel quickly between faraway places. Now, my next point may expose my knowledge or lack thereof for Metroidvanias, but I'm used to the game progressively adding more and more difficult platforming into the mix, and in Blasphemous, the platforming almost plays second fiddle to the combat. Does the game have troublesome areas through platforming? Of course. The Graveyard of the Peaks involves you paying attention to the direction of the wind, so you know when it's safe to jump, or the sleeping canvases and the swinging pendulums that barely give you any room to move. But the game's combat is the focus in regards to challenge, and the platforming is usually only made challenging through enemy placement. Blasphemous' focus on combat is obvious right from the beginning. Almost immediately, within the first couple of minutes of gameplay, you'll encounter the game's first boss, Warden of the Silent Sorrow. The Warden is not a boss that is intended to be difficult. It really is the game's tutorial that teaches you a vital lesson that carries through to the end. The Warden only has 2 attacks and no extra phases, so that you can quickly learn the tells for each attack, so you can know when to dodge and when you'll have openings to heal or attack. We're only a couple of minutes in and we've defeated our first boss, which should tell you that not only is the combat a focus of Blasphemous gameplay, but this is how you need to be thinking when you're in combat. This lesson is most important and why the game's platforming and traversal isn't really shown until afterwards. Now, the enemies scattered throughout the different areas don't require the same attention to subtle details like tells of certain attacks, because they usually just have the one attack to worry about, but you'll still need to learn how quickly or slowly these attacks happen and whether you can counter them or you'll need to dodge. You'll encounter enemies ranging from melee and ranged, big and small, offensive and defensive, and humanoid enemies and ghostly creatures who can phase through platforms. Every enemy one-on-one aren't too challenging, as the combat for Blasphemous is really fast and you can take out most enemies with ease, but it's their placement amongst the levels, how many enemies you need to fight at once, and how the platforming and environment is involved where the challenge comes into play, and where the platforming and combat truly come together. It's from here I best talk about what you can do. You can jump, slide or dodge, counter or parry, and attack. And whilst you do only have access to the mea culpa in terms of melee, there is quite a lot of customization to be done through the game's relics, rosary beads, and prayers. The relics act as your typical Metroidvania power-ups, but you can only equip 3 at a time, and need to be constantly changing these up depending on your given situation. Rosary beads act as offensive or defensive buffs, and again you'll need to be changing these up depending on the area, and prayers that can range from defensive shields to powerful beams of destruction. This mixed in with finding upgrades for your health flasks, prayer meter, rosary knots, and mea culpa upgrade statues where you can spend the game's currency, give you not only a great amount of variety, but encourage you to scour each area because your offense and defense are always improving. As I mentioned earlier though, Blasphemous' focus and where the gameplay can truly be highlighted is through the game's many boss fights. Now, the challenge of a Souls game does come from that fear of death after a tough area, getting to a boss, dying, and having to make your way back all over again. This style of gameplay is the case throughout each area until you unlock shortcuts back to the game's shrines, but this fear isn't present for the bosses. There are shrines just before each boss, so it does encourage you to really try and learn a boss's attack pattern without any real fear of death, as you don't have to travel far to get right back into the fight and put what you've learned into practice. I personally had the most fun and challenge through the normal sized humanoid bosses than these big creatures, just because I felt they left me with such little room for error and almost no room for healing myself up. Chrysanta absolutely whooped me for a solid hour, but once I finally beat her, I may as well have screamed for joy. I was pumped, and she was by far my favourite fight of the game. But other highlights go to His Holiness Escriba, as his fire attack in his final form is truly a test of looking for openings and ensuring you maneuver the arena correctly, because these will wipe you out quick, and Esdras being the game's true first test of your skills. Even boss fights and areas that aren't too challenging keep you on the edge of your seat through the game's excellent soundtrack. Carlos Viola created Blasphemous' soundtrack, and the heavy drum beats mixing with the excellent guitar work both complement the game's thick atmosphere whilst also making you feel badass whilst in combat. The tracks range from somber and melodic to outright metal as hell. I seriously recommend checking out the soundtrack, it's badass. As much as I enjoyed all Blasphemous had to offer in regards to gameplay, I mean, I wouldn't have bothered playing the game twice if I didn't thoroughly enjoy my time with the game, Blasphemous does have some issues. Any enemy that can go out of your field of view and meaning you can't attack them just slows down the combat a little too much for my liking and can result in you being hit rather unfairly. Not a huge issue, but an issue noticeable through the ghosts, Melquiades, and the final boss. However, a constant issue I found was some of the boss's AI just breaking, almost making them freeze in place and just taking all the challenge away, along with feeling like the knowledge of learning their attack patterns was for nothing. Expositor and again Melquiades were both bosses that did this to me, and it's a serious shame because visually they are so incredibly designed, but when they break, it just acted as a letdown for me. You could also say that some of the game's side objectives and puzzles aren't very well explained and a little too hidden. I did have to look up a couple just to understand what exactly the game wanted from me, and it can be found in-game, you just need to know where to look. These are really my only issues with the gameplay, as I absolutely adored everything else Blasphemous had to offer. I'm not a person who usually goes for 100%, but I was absolutely determined to do so for Blasphemous. The contrast between both playthroughs was so mind-blowing as to how much I actually missed my first time around. Through going for 100%, I found more characters, more side quests, beefed up the penitent one as much as possible, unlocked new skins, got to further appreciate the Metroidvania genre, and had a blast for over 20 hours of gameplay altogether. Blasphemous doesn't do anything too different for its gameplay, but for the most part, it's super polished, has some great challenging areas and bosses, and let me further appreciate the story and the visuals. With the focus centered around the combat rather than the platforming, it was right up my alley, and at the end of the day, I think that's why I enjoyed playing the game as much as I did. Blasphemous is really something special. Visually, it is one of my favorite games of all time. I mean, it is gorgeous from start to finish, but going into the game, I expected this. What really surprised me was the game's story, and despite not being anything different, the gameplay just being super polished. Literally, as soon as I was done with my first playthrough, I knew I needed to go back and start it all over again. I needed to explore every nook and cranny of this world, find every collectible, speak to every character, complete every quest, and learn every boss and enemy's attack pattern. Blasphemous is all I could think about until I finished my second playthrough and 100%ed the game. I mean, I dreamt about this game is how badly I wanted to keep going. I don't know how much more I can get my point across. Blasphemous quickly rose to the top for my favorite Metroidvania, and even entered the conversation for one of my favorite games of all time. If you haven't played this game and now want to, go and pick it up. I know I gave a spoiler warning in the beginning, but there is so much more to discover within the game that I left out. Blasphemous really changed how I look at the Metroidvania genre, and now I can't wait to get to so many others that have been sitting in my backlog, like The Messenger or Bloodstained. Blasphemous was something incredible. I can't wait to play the DLC when it eventually releases, and I'm just so glad that I finally played it.